When a security guard looked at the man standing in line and decided he didn't belong inside, he had no idea he was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. It was a bright Thursday morning in San Francisco, March 14th, 2019. Outside the Moscone Center, one of the most famous convention buildings in the entire country, thousands of people in sharp suits and expensive shoes were streaming through a tall glass door. Inside, tech billionaires were shaking hands. Investors were writing checks. The biggest names in Silicon Valley were getting ready to take the stage. And standing quietly in line, wearing a plain black t-shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of old leather boots, was a man with a canvas bag over his shoulder. No entourage, no bodyguards, no flashy car waiting at the curb. Just a man. Calm, quiet, awaiting his turn like everybody else. When he finally reached the front of the line, a young security guard named Marcus Webb looked him up and down once. Then he looked again. And what he saw, the worn boots, the simple shirt, the bag that looked like it came from a hardware store, made him make a decision that would change everything that happened that day. He told the man he didn't look professional enough to come inside. The man didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pull out his phone to post about it or call for a manager or make a single scene. He just said one quiet word. Okay. Then he stepped to the side, pulled out his phone, and made a call. That call lasted 4 minutes and 53 seconds. And at the 5-minute mark, one of the most powerful technology events of the year came crashing down. Because the man Marcus Webb had just turned away wasn't a delivery driver, wasn't a lost tourist, wasn't someone who wandered in off the street. His name was Keanu Reeves. And what nobody standing at that glass door knew yet. Not Marcus, not the investors inside, not even the young woman preparing the most important speech of her life in a small white room at the back of the building, was that this moment had actually begun 18 months earlier. With a torn page from a magazine, with an anonymous envelope full of money, with a quiet, secret act of kindness so carefully hidden that the person it saved had no idea who was responsible. Until the day she opened a letter and found the answer sitting right there inside it. Watch this whole video, because what Keanu Reeves did next, and the truth about what he had already been doing long before anyone was watching, is the kind of story that makes you stop and look at the world a little differently. The kind that stays with you. The kind you will want to tell someone else before the day is over. It started with a door. Not a special door. Just a tall glass one with a silver handle, polished until you could see your own face looking back at you. The kind of door that said, before you even touched it, that not everyone was welcome on the other side. The date was March 14th, 2019. San Francisco was having one of those rare, warm mornings where the fog hadn't rolled in yet, and the whole city looked like it had been scrubbed clean overnight. And the air smelled like coffee and salt water and something electric, the way cities smell when something big is about to happen. The Moscone Center, one of the largest convention venues in the entire country, was buzzing like a hive that had been shaken. Outside, banners the size of buildings hung from the stone walls, bright white with silver lettering, that caught the morning sun and threw it back at you. They read, Nexus Innovation, Expo 2019. The future starts here. Inside those banners, some of the most powerful names in technology were already doing what powerful people do at events like this. Adjusting microphones, rehearsing speeches, shaking hands that would later sign checks with a lot of zeros. The lobby gleamed. The catering tables were full. Everyone inside was wearing something that said, I belong here. Outside, you're standing quietly in a slow-moving line on Howard Street, was a man in a black t-shirt, dark jeans, worn leather boots with real miles on them, the kind of boots that have seen rain and road, and don't apologize for it. A canvas bag hung from one shoulder, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. He had a beard that hadn't seen a razor in a few days, and his dark hair was a little long, curling just slightly at the edges. He looked like a guy who might fix your motorcycle in his spare time. Or maybe a high school science teacher who coached track on the weekends. He didn't look famous. He didn't look like money. He didn't look like the sort of man that movie theaters full of strangers had cheered for, or that 12-year-olds had posters of on their bedroom walls, or that grown adults quoted in the dark when they needed to feel braver. His name was Keanu Reeves. He was 54 years old. He was, at that exact moment, one of the most beloved human beings on the planet. But he wasn't dressed like it, and that, it turned out, was going to be a problem. When he reached the front of the line, a young man stepped directly into his path. His name was Marcus Webb, 26 years old, broad-shouldered, with the posture of someone who had just been given a small amount of power and was still figuring out how to hold it. He wore a blazer with the Nexus silver logo stitched on the breast pocket, and he held a tablet like a shield. "Badge," Marcus said. Keanu patted his bag calmly. "My name should be on the list. Keanu Reeves." Marcus looked at the tablet. He scrolled once, twice. His eyes flicked up to the man in front of him, the worn boots, the plain shirt, the canvas bag, and then back down. "I'll need to see a photo ID," Marcus said slowly, "along with your press credentials or sponsor badge." Keanu reached into his bag without complaint and produced his driver's license. Just his license. No lanyard, no badge, nothing shiny. Marcus held the ID. He looked at it for a long time. He looked back up. "Sir." His voice had gone careful and flat. "This is a professional event. Our dress code requires business or business casual attire." A pause that lasted just 1 second too long. "You don't appear to meet that standard." Around them, the line kept moving. A woman in a blazer glanced over. A man with a lanyard around his neck craned sideways. Nobody said anything. Nobody ever does. Keanu Reeves looked at Marcus Webb for a quiet moment. Not with anger. Not with embarrassment. With something far more difficult to describe. The look of a man who has survived enough real pain that having a door closed in his face barely registers on the scale of hard things. "Okay," he said softly. He stepped to the side. He pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. He stood in the warm San Francisco morning, beside the tall glass door, and spoke quietly for 4 minutes and 53 seconds. At the 5-minute mark, everything changed. But before we get there, before we follow the phone call and the decision and the moment that turned a normal Thursday morning into something nobody at the Nexus Innovation Expo would ever stop talking about, you need to understand something first. You need to understand who was actually standing outside that door. Not the character, not the legend, not the action hero with the gun and the long black coat, the real one. The man underneath all of that. Because the real one is so much more interesting than anything a movie studio ever put on a screen. Keanu Charles Reeves was born on September 2nd, 1964, in Beirut, Lebanon. His mother, Patricia, was English, a costume designer with bright eyes and a restless spirit. His father, Samuel, was half Hawaiian, half Chinese, and mostly absent. Samuel left when Keanu was 3 years old. He would spend stretches of Keanu's childhood in and out of prison on drug charges. Keanu would not have a real relationship with him for the rest of his life. Patricia moved her children, Keanu and his younger sister Kim, eventually to Toronto, Canada, where Keanu grew up bouncing between neighborhoods and between schools. He attended 4 different high schools. He struggled with dyslexia in a time when nobody really knew how to help kids with dyslexia. They just called you slow, or difficult, or unlikely. He was a gifted hockey goalie. He was funny. He was quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are carrying things they haven't found words for yet. He did not look, to most people who taught him, like someone who was going to matter. But he did matter. He just did it on his own timeline, and mostly without asking for permission. By 2019, Keanu had been making films for over 30 years. He had made people laugh in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in 1989. He had made people grip their armrests in Speed in 1994. He had made people genuinely reconsider the nature of reality in The Matrix in 1999. A film so strange and so visionary that it changed the entire language of action cinema. And now, in the spring of 2019, John Wick. Chapter 3 was weeks away from releasing, and the whole world was remembering all over again exactly who this man was. But the whole world had forgotten something important. They had forgotten the grief. In December 1999, the same month The Matrix was changing everything, Keanu's girlfriend, a woman named Jennifer Syme, gave birth to their daughter. The baby came too early, 8 months into the pregnancy. The little girl, they had already chosen her name, Ava Archer Syme Reeves, was stillborn. She never breathed. She never opened her eyes. Keanu and Jennifer held her anyway. 18 months later, on April 2nd, 2001, Jennifer Syme died in a car accident on Cahuenga Boulevard in Los Angeles. She was 28 years old. She drove into 3 parked cars in the early morning hours and was gone before help arrived. Keanu was 36. He had lost his daughter, and then, before he had fully learned how to carry that, he had lost the woman he had lost her with. He did not collapse in front of cameras. He did not write a book about it. He did not give a devastating interview on a late-night couch that people clipped and shared. He grieved privately, the way people grieve when the pain is too real to perform. He just kept going. He kept showing up. On film sets, yes, but also in the small, ordinary moments that nobody was watching. The time he stopped on a Los Angeles freeway to help a woman whose car had broken down, staying until the tow truck came. The time he sat on a curb in Hollywood for over an hour, talking with a homeless man, buying him food, treating him like someone worth staying for. The time he quietly redirected $61 million of his Matrix earnings to the costume and visual effects teams because, he said simply, they were the ones who had actually made the film possible. He co-founded a motorcycle company, Arch Motorcycle, in 2011 because motorcycles made him feel close to the earth. He took the subway in New York when nobody expected him to. He gave up his seat for strangers who didn't know who he was. He was not a man who needed to be seen, which is exactly why, on that warm March morning, he had arrived at one of the most important technology events of the year with a canvas bag on his shoulder and no one beside him, and boots that looked like they'd been somewhere real. He had been personally invited by a 23-year-old from Fresno named Priya Nandakumar. And what Priya was trying to build, what she had nearly broken herself trying to make real, was the kind of thing that Keanu Reeves believed in more deeply than he had believed in almost anything. She was somewhere inside that building right now, preparing for the most important moment of her young life. And he had just been told he didn't look professional enough to come through the door. Inside, Priya Nandakumar had been awake since 4 a.m. She was sitting in the Nexus speaker green room, a plain white box of a room that smelled like fresh paint and stale coffee, with her notes spread across her knees and her heart beating slightly too fast. The fluorescent light above her buzzed at a frequency that felt personal. There was a mirror ringed with bright bulbs, the kind performers use, and every time she looked into it, she had to resist the urge to look away from herself. She had rewritten her speech 47 times. This was not an exaggeration. She had a notebook to prove it. Pages dense with her own handwriting, words crossed out and rewritten, arrows pointing to paragraphs that had moved 6 times, margin notes that said things like "too much," and "say this slower," and, on one page near the middle, just the word "breathe" in capital letters, underlined 3 times. She was 23 years old. She was about to speak to 2,200 people. She had never spoken to more than 300. But she was ready. She had been getting ready her whole life. Even when she hadn't known, that was what she was doing. Priya had grown up in Fresno, California, in a neighborhood where the nearest public library was 3 bus rides away, and the school computers were so old they took 4 minutes to load a web page, when they worked at all. Her father, Rajan Nandakumar, drove a delivery truck 6 days a week. Her mother, Meena, cleaned office buildings at night, coming home after midnight smelling like floor polish, slipping off her shoes quietly so she wouldn't wake the children. They were not poor in the way that means nothing. There was always food, always a roof, and always love so steady it felt like gravity. But they were poor in the way that narrows the world, the way that makes certain futures feel like they belong to other people, people from other neighborhoods, other zip codes, other stories. Priya had refused to accept that. At 15, she had taught herself to code using free YouTube videos on a laptop borrowed from her school's resource room. She stayed after class to use it because the internet at home was too slow to stream video reliably. She sat in a plastic chair in an empty classroom and learned Python and HTML and CSS from strangers on the internet who were teaching for free because they believed that knowledge shouldn't have a price tag. At 17, she won a small state technology competition. The prize was $400 and a certificate. She spent the money on books. She got into UC Berkeley on a full academic scholarship. The scholarship covered tuition. It did not cover housing. For the first semester of her freshman year, she slept in her cousin's car, a 2003 Honda Civic with a broken heater, parked 3 blocks from campus. She showered at the gym. She attended every class. She did not tell anyone until a professor named Dr. Anita Sorensen noticed she was always in the building before it opened and gently asked why. Dr. Sorensen found her a room in the dormitories within a week. Priya never forgot that, the specific feeling of someone noticing, of someone asking the right question, and then actually doing something about the answer. It was that feeling, that precise, a life-altering feeling of being seen by someone who then used their power to open a door, that had become the entire foundation of Roots. She had started Roots at 21, while still finishing her degree. The name stood for Real Opportunities for Opportunity-Starved Students. The mission was not complicated. Find kids in low-income neighborhoods who had the talent but not the access. Give them real technology education and real mentorship, and stay with them until the future opened up. Simple idea. 2 years of closed doors and unanswered emails and donors who said "admirable" in the voice that means goodbye. And then the money had come. A large, real, life-changing amount of it, arriving through a legal organization, no name attached, with a single condition: keep doing what you're doing. That money had built 3 Roots classrooms in Fresno. It had purchased 200 computers. It had paid 4 educators a salary that was actually a salary. It had created, at this moment, a program serving 340 children. 11 of those children had been accepted into university computer science programs. 4 were already interning at real technology companies. One 12-year-old girl had filed her first patent. All of that was Priya. All of that had come from a 21-year-old who slept in a Honda Civic and stayed after class and refused, quietly and stubbornly, to accept that the future wasn't hers. And now, she was sitting in a white room under buzzing lights, 40 minutes from the biggest speech of her life, and not yet knowing that the person who mattered most, the one who had believed in her before she believed in herself, was standing outside this building in a plain black t-shirt, being turned away at the door. Keanu Reeves did not pace. He did not mutter under his breath. He did not pull up his phone and fire off an angry message, or take a photograph of the entrance sign and post it somewhere so the world could be outraged on his behalf. He simply stepped aside. He set his canvas bag down against the stone pillar, the one about 30 feet from the entrance, where the shadow of the Moscone Center fell across the pavement in a clean, diagonal line, and he stood quietly for a moment. He watched Howard Street the way a person watches something ordinary when they are thinking about something not ordinary at all. A delivery van double-parked outside a coffee shop. 2 pigeons arguing over something near the curb. A woman in a yellow jacket pushing a stroller with one hand and holding a phone to her ear with the other, talking fast, already deep into her day. Life going on, the way life always goes on, indifferent and continuous, and somehow comforting in its indifference. Then he looked down at his phone. A young security guard named Tommy Brask watched him from his post near the entrance. Tommy was 22 years old. He had grown up in Daly City, just south of San Francisco, in a small house with his mother and his Uncle Ray. Uncle Ray had owned 3 things that Tommy considered sacred: a decent television, a second-hand DVD player, and a complete collection of Matrix films in their original cases. Teen Tommy had watched those films so many times in Uncle Ray's living room that certain lines from them had become part of the way he thought, not as movie quotes, but as actual thoughts, as real as anything he'd come up with himself. He had watched Marcus Webb stop the man in the black t-shirt. He had watched the ID exchange. He had heard, just barely, the words dress code and standard, and the small, calm okay that followed. Now he was watching the man stand beside the pillar, looking at his phone, and Tommy had a feeling in his chest that he recognized from Uncle Ray's living room. The feeling of watching something and knowing before it happened, that it was going to matter. He said nothing. He stayed at his post. He watched. Keanu scrolled to a contact named Claire Weston and pressed call. Claire was 41. She's with sharp brown eyes and the kind of organized mind that could hold 17 things at once without losing any of them. She had spent her 30s producing independent films in Los Angeles and her early 40s building a bridge between the entertainment world and the technology philanthropy space. She had met Keanu 6 years earlier at a fundraiser in Malibu, and they had become the kind of friends who didn't speak for months and then picked up exactly where they left off. 3 weeks ago, Claire had personally arranged Keanu's invitation to the Nexus Innovation Expo. She had contacted Derek Holloway's office directly. She had sent 2 confirmation emails and made 1 follow-up call. She had been told, clearly and twice, that Keanu Reeves was confirmed as a private guest and potential future sponsor. His name was on every list that was supposed to matter. She answered on the second ring. "You're late," she said warmly. "You should already be inside." "I'm outside," Keanu said. A pause, short but meaningful. "What do you mean, outside?" "They didn't let me in." He said it simply, the way you report the weather. Factual. Unhurried. "I'm sorry." Her voice sharpened. They didn't. Keanu, your name is on the... They said I didn't look professional enough. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when a person's brain receives information that doesn't fit into any existing category. Claire Weston made a sound, not a word, not quite, that fell somewhere between a gasp and a laugh and something genuinely speechless. Then she collected herself, the way capable people collect themselves, fast and completely. "Okay," she said. "Oh, okay. I'm calling Derek right now." "Tell him I'd like to speak with him," Keanu said. "And Claire, tell him it's about Priya Nandakumar's keynote. Make sure he understands that's the part that matters." He hung up. Derek Holloway was 53 years old and had not become the founder and CEO of Nexus Capital Partners by being slow. He had built his career on reading rooms quickly, understanding, within minutes of walking into any situation, where the power was and where it was going. He was standing near the main stage reviewing lighting schematics with his event director when his phone vibrated. He saw Claire Weston's name. He answered immediately. She spoke for 45 seconds. Derek Holloway did not say a single word for 10 full seconds after she stopped. He then turned to his event director and said, and with a quietness that people who worked for him knew was more serious than shouting, "Find Marcus Webb! Right now!" He did not find Marcus Webb in time. He found instead Tommy Brask, still standing near the door, who looked at Derek Holloway when he arrived and said, without being asked, "He's by the pillar, sir. The stone one. He hasn't moved." Derek Holloway walked out of the Moscone Center, through the side entrance on Howard Street, and crossed the pavement quickly. He saw Keanu Reeves standing exactly where Tommy said, canvas bag at his feet, phone in his hand, watching the pigeons on the curb with the patience of someone who had learned that patience was not the same as weakness. Derek stopped in front of him. His face had the color of a man who had just understood the full weight of something. "Mr. Reeves." His voice was careful and quiet. "I cannot begin to tell you how deeply—" Keanu put out his hand, not to stop him, to greet him. A real handshake, steady and unhurried. "Is Priya Nandakumar inside?" Keanu asked. Derek blinked. Of all the sentences he had prepared to receive, that one had not been among them. "Yes," he said slowly. "She's in the green room. She goes on in 40 minutes. Keanu picked up his canvas bag. "Good," he said. "Let's make sure she has everything she needs." He walked through the door. Behind him, standing at his post beside the pillar, Tommy Brask let out a long, slow breath. He didn't know the full story yet. He didn't know about the anonymous donation, or the torn magazine page, or what was about to happen in the green room, or the even larger storm that was already forming quietly on the other side of the building. The thing that would make this day so much harder before it got better. Nobody knew that part yet. It was still 4 chapters away. But in the green room, the next chapter was already beginning. Priya had stopped rewriting her speech. Not because it was finished, she wasn't sure it would ever feel finished, but because her hand had gone still on its own, the way hands do when the body decides it has done enough preparing, and what comes next simply has to come. She was sitting with the notebook closed on her knees, her water bottle still unopened beside her, staring at a small scratch on the opposite wall and breathing the way Dr. Sorensen had taught her to breathe before difficult things. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. And she was on her 3rd cycle when the door opened. He came in quietly. No knock, no announcement, just the soft click of the latch, and then a man in a black t-shirt standing in the doorway of a white room with bad fluorescent lighting, looking entirely unbothered by the fact that he was Keanu Reeves. Priya had seen photographs, Magazine covers, movie posters, the kind of images that get reproduced so many times they stop looking like a real person and start looking like a symbol, a face that belongs to the world rather than to itself. In person, he was just a person, tall, quiet, with kind eyes that looked at her directly, not in the way that powerful people sometimes look at young people, measuring, categorizing, but in the way that said, "I came here specifically for you, and I have time." "Priya Nandakumar," he said. Yes," she stood up. Her chair scraped the floor loudly in the small room, and she winced slightly at the sound. "I'm Keanu Reeves." He crossed the room and shook her hand. His grip was warm and unhurried. "I read about Roots in Wired magazine, a small piece near the back, about a year and a half ago." She blinked. Wired. She had not known about that article. Nobody had told her it had run. "I almost didn't make it in today," he said simply. He didn't explain further. He pulled a folding chair close and sat down, setting his canvas bag on the floor beside him, and looked at her with the full and genuine attention of someone who had nowhere else to be and nothing more important to do. "Tell me about the kids," he said. She told him. And this is the part that Priya Nandakumar would describe to people for the rest of her life. In interviews and in speeches and in quiet conversations at dinner tables. Not the standing ovation, not the donors who called afterward, not the expansion funding or the magazine profiles, or any of the measurable, documentable, impressive things that came later. This, a folding chair in a white room, a man who actually listened. He did not look at his phone. He did not nod in the distracted way that means a person is composing their response while you are still speaking. He did not offer a single piece of advice or redirect the conversation toward himself once. He just listened. Completely. The way that almost nobody listens anymore, if they ever really did. She told him about Marcus Jr., MJ, everyone called him, a boy from southwest Fresno who had come into Roots at 13, unable to sit still for 15 consecutive minutes. You who had been sent to the principal's office so many times that the secretary knew his snack order. Who had been quietly, consistently told by a series of well-meaning but exhausted teachers that he was better suited for trade school, that college was ambitious, that he should think carefully about realistic expectations. MJ had built a functioning app at 14. It helped elderly residents in his neighborhood schedule grocery deliveries from local stores. He had built it in 11 weeks. He had shown it to a Roots mentor with the specific expression of someone bracing for disappointment, and had not known what to do, when instead he received pure, uncomplicated amazement. She told Keanu about Fatima Osi, 12 years old, the daughter of Ghanaian immigrants, so quiet in class that teachers sometimes forgot to call on her. That Fatima had filed her first patent at 11, with help from a Roots mentor. It was a modified irrigation sensor for small home gardens, designed to reduce water waste. She had built the prototype in her kitchen using $37 of parts from a hardware store. She told him what it felt like to walk into a room full of children who had been told, in 1,000 different small and devastating ways, that the technology world was not built for them, and watch that belief begin to crack open like ice in spring. Slow at first, then all at once. When she finished, the room was quiet. Keanu Reeves looked at her for a moment the way people look at something true. "What do you still need?" he said. "For Roots. What's missing?" Priya tilted her head. "Nobody ever asks that. It's the only question that matters." She took a breath. "See, more cities. We're in Fresno. I want Oakland, Stockton, Bakersfield. I want to be everywhere in California, where a kid like MJ is sitting in front of a computer that doesn't work and being told the future belongs to someone else. She paused. I want to prove that it doesn't. Before he could answer, someone knocked. The door opened. A young assistant in a Nexus lanyard stood in the frame, her face carrying the specific expression of someone who has been asked to deliver news they would rather not deliver. Ms. Nandakumar? She hesitated. Mr. Reeves? Another hesitation. Mr. Holloway needs you both. There's been a situation with one of the keynote sponsors. Priya felt the air change in the room. What kind of situation? She asked carefully. The assistant looked at her tablet, then back up. Her voice dropped slightly, as if lowering the volume might soften what the words actually meant. The Meridian Group is threatening to pull their sponsorship. A pause no longer than a heartbeat. They're asking for your keynote to be cancelled. The room went absolutely silent. Priya felt the floor tilt beneath her, the way it does when something you have been building toward for years suddenly shows you just how fragile the ground beneath it really is. She looked at Keanu. Keanu Reeves looked back at her. His expression had not changed, not by a single degree. And then, slowly and deliberately, he reached down and picked up his phone. But he didn't dial. Not yet. He set it on his knee, face up, and looked at Priya first. Just for a moment. The way you look at someone before something difficult begins, to make sure they know they are not alone in it. Then he looked at the assistant in the doorway. Tell Derek we'll be there in 2 minutes, he said quietly. The assistant nodded and disappeared. The door clicked shut again. The green room felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. Priya was standing very still, her notebook pressed against her chest like something she needed to hold on to. Her face was composed, professionally, effortfully composed. But her eyes were doing the thing that eyes do when a person is fighting very hard to keep the rest of their face from following. This has happened before, she said. Her voice was steady, just barely. Not this big, but versions of this. Someone deciding I don't belong on a stage before I've said a single word. Keanu looked at her. I know, he said. And the way he said it, not as a platitude, not as a comfort offered from a safe distance, but as a simple statement of fact from someone who understood what it meant to be measured and found lacking before you'd been given a chance to speak, made Priya believe him completely. He stood up. He put his phone in his pocket. Come on, he said. To understand what the Meridian Group was, you have to understand what $9 billion of influence actually looks like when it decides to move. It doesn't look like a threat. Not openly. It looks like a phone call, a quiet dinner conversation, a suggestion offered with a smile that perhaps the program could be restructured, that perhaps the timing wasn't right, that perhaps, and this was always the word perhaps doing the heavy lifting, a different platform might be more suitable. And the Meridian Group had been founded in 1998 by 3 former Wall Street executives who had recognized very early that the real money in the coming century was going to be made in technology. They had been right. By 2019, the firm managed $9 billion in assets, funded dozens of major startups, and maintained a network of relationships so deeply embedded in Silicon Valley that their approval, or disapproval, could open or close more doors than any badge or blazer ever could. Its managing partner was a man named Gordon Fitch. Gordon was 61 years old, silver-haired, and wore suits handmade by a tailor in Milan who had been making suits for him for 15 years. He had the kind of handshake that was designed to communicate something, a firmness calibrated to remind you, without saying it, that he had been in rooms larger than this one, making decisions larger than this one, For longer than you had been paying attention. He had looked at the Nexus keynote lineup 3 weeks earlier and had felt a familiar, practiced discomfort. Not with all of it, just with one name. He had called Derek Holloway. They had met for dinner at a restaurant in the financial district, the kind of place where the lighting is dim and the portions are small and the conversations are worth more than anything on the menu. Gordon had not said outright that Priya Nandakumar should be removed from the main keynote. He was too experienced for outright. Instead, he had talked about brand alignment, about audience expectations, about how the Nexus Expo's primary constituency, investors, established firms, the enterprise technology companies, might find a talk about teaching coding in Fresno to be, and here he had chosen his word with the care of a man who chose all his words carefully. Tangential. Derek Holloway had pushed back, quietly but firmly. Priya's slot was staying. Gordon had let it go, right up until this morning. Because this morning, Gordon's phone had begun buzzing with messages from people inside the Moscone Center, the particular kind of well-connected, information-hungry people who attended events like this, telling him that Keanu Reeves had arrived, that he had been detained outside, that he was now inside, and that he had gone directly to the speaker green room to see Priya Nandakumar. Gordon Fitch understood immediately what that meant. A young nonprofit founder giving a keynote was a pleasant story. And a young nonprofit founder giving a keynote with Keanu Reeves visibly in attendance, seated in the front row, perhaps standing to endorse her, perhaps photographed beside her afterward, was something else entirely. It was a news cycle. It was a viral moment. It was the kind of attention that turned small organizations into movements and made powerful men, who had quietly tried to keep them small, look very bad in retrospect. Gordon did not want that. At 9:47 a.m., he called Derek Holloway's personal cell. He did not use the word tangential this time. He used the word sponsorship. He used the number $1.4 million. He used the phrase effective immediately. Derek Holloway stood in the hallway outside the green room with that number pressing on his chest like a physical weight, staring at the closed door, calculating in the way that people who run things are always calculating. Costs against costs, risks against risks, the uncomfortable arithmetic of doing the right thing in a world that prices everything. He told Gordon he needed 20 minutes. Gordon gave him 10. What Gordon Fitch did not know, what he could not have known, sitting comfortably at the Meridian Group's polished sponsor booth with his coffee and his certainty, was that on the other side of the green room door, a man in a plain black t-shirt had just picked up his phone. And what neither Gordon nor Derek nor Marcus Webb nor anyone else in the Moscone Center knew yet was the deeper truth still buried underneath all of it. The thing that connected the anonymous donation and the torn magazine page and the worn boots and the glass door and this hallway and this moment, and the truth that had been sitting quietly at the center of this entire day, waiting, the way true things wait, for exactly the right moment to become visible. That moment was getting close now. Very close. But first, Derek Holloway had a decision to make. He was standing in the hallway outside the green room when Keanu and Priya came through the door. He had his phone in one hand and the expression of a man who had been doing math he didn't like and kept arriving at the same answer. He looked at Priya first, a quick, apologetic glance, the look of someone who has failed to protect something they meant to protect. Then he looked at Keanu. Keanu looked back at him steadily. "Walk with me," Keanu said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a command either. And it was something quieter than both. The kind of sentence that certain people say in certain moments that simply rearranges the air around it. Derek walked. Priya stayed in the hallway. She stood with her back against the wall and her notebook in her hands and watched them go. Two men moving through the controlled chaos of the Nexus Expo floor, past the sponsor booths and the camera rigs and the catering tables and the 2,000 people who had come here today believing they were attending a technology conference and had no idea they were standing inside a much more important story. She watched until they turned a corner and disappeared. Then she closed her eyes and did the breathing thing again. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. But what Keanu said to Derek Holloway in the next 4 minutes was witnessed by no one except Derek himself, who would later describe it only as the most clarifying conversation he had experienced in 20 years of running things. What is known, what Derek confirmed, carefully, to a journalist named Sandra Osi 18 months later, is the shape of it. Keanu had not been angry. That was the first thing Derek said, every time he told it. He had been the opposite of angry. He had been so completely calm that the calm itself was more convincing than any raised voice could have been. He had told Derek 2 things. The first was this: if Priya Nandakumar's keynote was cancelled, for any reason, under any pressure, at the request of any sponsor, he would ask his team to release a public statement that same afternoon. And the statement would name the event. It would name the reason. It would be specific and factual, and it would travel very fast, because things that are specific and factual and attached to certain names always do. He was not, he said, doing this as a punishment. He was doing it because Priya had earned her place on that stage through years of work that most people in this building could not have survived. And he was not willing to watch that be quietly taken from her in a hallway while a man with a large checkbook made phone calls. The second thing he told Derek was simpler. He said, "You already know what the right thing is. You knew it before Gordon called you. You knew it before I walked in this morning. You don't actually need me to tell you." He let that sit for a moment. And then he said, "I'm going to go find Gordon Fitch now." The Meridian Group's sponsor booth was one of the most prominent in the main expo hall, a large architectural installation of dark wood and brushed steel with 4 screens, running rolling graphs of numbers, and 2 staff members in identical blazers standing at either end like sentries. Gordon Fitch was standing near the center of it, holding a coffee cup, speaking to a man in a gray suit when Keanu approached. Gordon saw him coming. He had the kind of situational awareness that came from decades of reading rooms, and he read this one correctly. The walk, the directness, the canvas bag that somehow, in this context, looked less like an oversight and more like a choice. He handed his coffee to the man in the gray suit and stepped forward. What happened in the next 4 minutes and 30 seconds, only Keanu Reeves and Gordon Fitch will ever know completely. What the rest of the world knows is the result. At 10:09 a.m., Gordon Fitch told his assistant to cancel his afternoon schedule. At 10:14 a.m., he left the Moscone Center through the main entrance on Howard Street, walking quickly, not stopping to speak to anyone, his silver hair catching the morning light as he moved through the glass door. The same glass door, polished and tall and silver-handled, without looking back. The Meridian Group did not pull its sponsorship. At 10:23 a.m., Priya Nandakumar walked onto the main stage of the Nexus Innovation Expo 2019. The room held 2,200 people. She stood at the podium for 1 full second before she spoke. Just 1 second. But it was a real one. The kind where a person gathers everything they are and everything they have survived, and holds it together in a single breath. Then she began. She didn't start with statistics. She didn't start with a slide or a graph or a polished opening line that she had rehearsed in front of a mirror. She started with a boy. "His name is Marcus," she said. "Everyone calls him MJ. He's 14 years old. He grew up 3 blocks from a freeway overpass in southwest Fresno, in a neighborhood where the biggest building is a check-cashing store, and the school computers haven't been updated since 2009. She paused. Last spring, MJ built an app, a real one that works. One that helps elderly people in his neighborhood order groceries from local stores without needing a smartphone or a credit card, just a phone call to a number MJ set up himself. She looked out at 2,200 people. He built it in 11 weeks. He was 13 years old. And the first thing he said when he showed it to his mentor was, she stopped, steadied herself. He said, "I didn't think I was allowed to make something like this." The room was very quiet. "That sentence," Priya said, "is why I'm here." She spoke for 22 minutes. She talked about Fatima and her irrigation sensor and the $37 of hardware store parts. She talked about her own first semester at Berkeley. Not the scholarship, not the acceptance letter, but the Honda Civic with the broken heater and the gym shower and the professor who asked one right question and then actually did something. She talked about what it cost a child, emotionally and permanently, to grow up being told that the future was being built by other people for other people, and their job was simply to stay out of the way. She talked about doors, not as a metaphor exactly, as a fact. The specific physical experience of standing outside something, a school, a program, an industry, a room, and being made to feel, without a single word being spoken, that the handle was not meant for your hand. She cried once, a single moment, about 14 minutes in, when she talked about the night she sat in her cousin's car outside the Berkeley campus and called her mother and told her she didn't think she could do it. And her mother, Meena Nandakumar, who cleaned office buildings at midnight and came home smelling like floor polish, had said, without hesitating, "You are already doing it. You just can't see it yet." Priya wiped her eye with the back of her hand. She did not apologize for it. She kept going. At the 22nd minute, she stopped speaking. The room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then it stood up. All of it. All 2,200 people, rising together in the kind of unplanned, unanimous movement that cannot be organized or rehearsed or manufactured. The kind that just happens when something true has been said in a room full of people who needed to hear it. In the third row, a man in a black t-shirt stood up first. He didn't clap loudly. He didn't whoop or whistle or make the moment about his presence. He just stood, and clapped, with the specific expression of someone watching a person receive something they have long deserved. Tommy Brask heard the applause from his post near the entrance. It moved through the walls of the Moscone Center, the way sound moves through a building when it means something. Not muffled, but full, the way a wave feels when it passes through water rather than over it. He felt it in his chest before he heard it properly with his ears. He stood a little straighter. He had spent most of the morning trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. The man at the pillar, the phone call, Derek Holloway's face when he came outside, the way Gordon Fitch had left through the front door without looking at anyone. He was 22 years old, and he understood perhaps 60% of what had happened today, which was enough to know that the 60% he understood mattered enormously. He thought about the Matrix. He always thought about the Matrix when things got complicated, because his Uncle Ray had told him once, during a rewatch on a rainy Sunday afternoon, that the films were not really about computers or simulations or kung fu. They were about seeing the world as it actually was, instead of as you had been told it was, and then choosing, despite everything, to act on what you saw. Tommy had seen a man turned away from a door this morning because of his boots. He had watched that man walk through the door anyway, and use his next 4 hours not to demand an apology, but to make sure someone else got to stand on a stage. He understood something now that he hadn't understood at 8 o'clock this morning. Something about what power actually looked like when it was being used correctly. Not announced, not displayed, not worn on a blazer with a silver logo. Just used, quietly, in the direction of someone who needed it. He took out his phone and wrote a message to his mother. It said, "I want to do better. I'll explain later." He hit send. He put his phone away. He went back to watching the door. And the door, for the rest of that afternoon, was just a door again. People moved through it in both directions, attendees leaving early, journalists making calls on the sidewalk, catering staff carrying empty trays back to their vans. The San Francisco fog had finally arrived, the way it always does, rolling in from the bay in the mid-afternoon and cooling everything down suddenly and completely, like a city pulling a blanket over itself. Keanu Reeves left quietly at around 3 o'clock. Nobody made an announcement. There was no entourage, no car waiting at the curb with a door held open. He simply came through the entrance, nodded once at Tommy Brask, a small, genuine nod. The kind between people who have shared a morning without sharing a single word, and walked out onto Howard Street with his canvas bag on his shoulder and his worn boots on the pavement and disappeared into the ordinary afternoon. Tommy watched him go. He thought, that is what it looks like. He didn't know exactly what he meant by that yet. He would spend the next several weeks figuring it out. But the image stayed with him, a man walking away from a moment he had entirely shaped, without looking back, without waiting to be thanked, without needing the story to have his name at the center of it. So 3 weeks later, in a converted storefront on Blackstone Avenue in Fresno, California, Priya Nandakumar opened a letter. Not an email. A letter. White envelope, no return address, postmarked Los Angeles. Her name and the Roots address written by hand in careful, unhurried print. She opened it at her desk on a Tuesday morning, surrounded by the sounds of children coding in the next room, the particular music of a place where something real is being built. Keyboards clicking. A mentor's voice explaining something patiently. A child laughing at something on a screen. The letter was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph said that the anonymous donor who had provided the original funding for Roots 18 months ago was prepared to expand that support. Significantly, it listed a number. It listed 3 cities: Oakland, Stockton, Bakersfield. Every city she had named in the green room. Every city she had described to a man in a folding chair who had listened without looking at his phone. The number was large enough that she read it 3 times. It was real all 3 times. The second paragraph was shorter. It said, "I read a small article about you in a magazine about a year and a half ago." Just a paragraph, near the back pages, the kind of thing most people skip past on their way to something bigger. It described what you were trying to build and why. I tore the page out. I kept it, because it reminded me that the most important things in the world rarely arrive with fanfare. They arrive quietly, in back pages, in converted storefronts, in rooms full of children who have been told the future isn't theirs. You gave a very good speech. To keep going. There was no signature, but there was something else inside the envelope. A small square of paper, worn soft at the edges, with the deep crease marks of something that had been folded and unfolded many times. The way you fold and unfold something you return to. Something you keep not in a drawer, but in a pocket. Close. It was a page torn from a magazine. Wired. The back section. A 200-word item with a small photograph. A young woman in a Fresno classroom, surrounded by children sitting at computers, all of them looking at their screens with the focused, serious expressions of people doing something that matters. Priya recognized the photograph immediately. She remembered the day it was taken. A Tuesday. Now she had been explaining variables to a group of 12-year-olds, and someone had come in with a camera, and she had barely noticed. She had never known the article had run. She sat very still for a long moment. Then she understood, fully, completely, all at once, the way understanding sometimes arrives, not gradually, but like a light coming on in a dark room. The anonymous donor who had funded Roots before she was anyone, before the Atlantic profile, before the speaking invitations, before the glass doors of the Moscone Center. Someone had read 200 words about a 21-year-old from Fresno who was trying to do something that looked, from the outside, nearly impossible, and had thought, quietly and without ceremony, this one had given money without a name attached, had then shown up at a convention center in a plain black t-shirt, and been turned away at the door and used every quiet, considerable ounce of his influence not to make it about himself, but to make sure she got to stand on the stage she had spent years earning. Had written her a letter, had not signed it. Because the point, the entire, consistent, lifelong point of the man, was never him. Priya held the torn magazine page in both hands. Through the wall, she could hear MJ laughing at something. She could hear Fatima asking a mentor a question in her precise, serious voice. She could hear the future being built, one keystroke at a time, by children who were finally, fully, unshakably certain that it belonged to them. She set the letter down carefully on her desk. She picked up her pen. She got back to work. And so did everyone else. By the end of 2019, Roots had expanded into Oakland and Stockton. New classrooms, new computers, new mentors who came in on Saturday mornings because they believed, the way Priya believed, that the most important investment a person could make was in a child who had been told they weren't worth investing in. By 2021, Roots served over 1,200 students across 5 California cities. Marcus Jr., MJ, graduated high school in June of that year. He enrolled in the computer science program at UC Davis on a full scholarship. At his graduation party, his mother made a hand-painted sign in red and gold letters that said, "The door is open." That was the phrase MJ used whenever he talked about what Roots had done for him. Not "they helped me," or "they changed my life." Those were true, but not specific enough. The door is open. That was the specific thing. That was the whole thing. Fatima Osei filed her second patent at 14, her third at 16. She told a reporter from the San Jose Mercury News, when asked who her greatest influence was, that it was her Roots mentor, a woman named Claudia Reyes, who had spent every Thursday afternoon for 2 years teaching Fatima that the distance between an idea and a real thing was mostly just time and stubbornness. Tommy Brask left event security in the autumn of 2019. He enrolled at City College of San Francisco. He eventually found his way to Roots' Oakland location as a Saturday volunteer, helping kids debug code and understand logic problems, never once mentioning that he had been standing at the door on the morning it all began. He felt it wasn't the important part of the story. He was right. Marcus Webb went back to school. He studied. He got quieter in the way that people get quieter when they are genuinely thinking. He became, by most accounts, someone worth knowing. And Keanu Reeves, who never confirmed the story when it began circulating quietly online years later, who gave no speeches about any of it, who accepted no credit and sought no spotlight, continued to ride his motorcycle through Los Angeles and give up his seat on the subway and tear pages from magazines when something small and true caught his eye. because that was who he was. That had always been who he was. The door was never really about him. He just made sure it opened. And that is the story of a man who was told he didn't belong, and used that moment not to fight for himself, but to open the door for someone else. Before you go, you drop a comment below and tell me, where in the world are you watching this from right now? It never gets old seeing just how far these stories travel. From Fresno to Fresno, from San Francisco to wherever you are sitting right now, this community is everywhere, and every single one of you is part of what makes it worth building. If this story moved you even a little, hit that like button right now. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because every like tells the world that kindness is still worth talking about. That quiet people doing powerful things in the background deserve to be seen. That stories like this one matter. And if you are new here, welcome. Hit subscribe and come join a community that believes the most important thing we can spread online is not anger, not outrage, not noise, but this. Stories that remind us what people are actually capable of when nobody is watching. The next video is on your screen right now. Click it, because if this story gave you something, that one will too. We will see you there.